Last video we talked a bit about dive comps and how they're not so much about diving, but more about map control and staging, and how a decent team's understanding of this means that we rarely see the type of dives that people expect. However, there are a few situations where teams do have the opportunities to go for these dives, usually as a result of map geometry, where a team's backline doesn't really have the room to back up out of dive range, but teams still don't tend to go for these. A good example to have in your head might be Anubis B, where the defending team's backline usually sets up somewhere around these boxes, and the map is built in a way that the attacking team can often rush 4 or 5 people down the chokes to take a deep dive. But we still don't see these dives for a few reasons. Firstly, these high-level teams are very good at scouting, so guaranteed this backline player has info on the dive, and although they might not survive, they can set up in a way that draws a lot of time and resources out of the enemy team. Another thing to remember is that these teams usually have their own backline, and putting so much into a dive opens them up to a very efficient backline trade, something that any support player is going to be pretty familiar with. These, plus a few smaller things, means it's often too much of an investment to send in a big dive on 1 or 2 targets, but the main reason we don't see them is again going back to that idea of staging and map control. Before, we talked about how dive needs to fill the map and clump the enemy up for a dive to be effective. And if we look at the situations where a team can go for one of those big dives, we can see how it not only opens up the entire map to the other team, but also ends up grouping themselves in that type of dangerous clump that we've already talked about. Meaning that, to the point of view of that other team, who currently control all of those staging areas for free and haven't had to commit any resources yet, they've just been given the perfect opportunity to just collapse on that team and blow them up. And this, in essence, is the idea of counter diving, of setting up for a dive to come in and then catching it. Catching the dive is quite a big topic, and again I'll talk about this another time, but understand that this playstyle has been around for quite a long time, so a lot of these teams are very good at it. There are obviously some situations where teams can get away with these dives using big advantages like Nanoblade or Primal, but as a whole the playstyle of diving has been more or less superseded by the playstyle of catching the dive. And again, if you look out for this next time you see these comps in the Overwatch League, you'll quickly recognize these situations and keep building that understanding of just how these teams are playing dive.